Hey, so I wanted to talk about magical schooling of the spirit and step 2 in Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Bardon for all of you who are going through all of the exercises, whether concurrently or on and off as you pick up the text. This is step 2, and this is magical schooling of the spirit. These are basically the concentration exercises. And these have proved very beneficial for me. I think these are good exercises, really independent of whatever spiritual path you're on. But these are concentration exercises that basically correspond to the different senses. And if you remember in Bardon terminology, these different exercises and these different senses correspond to the different elements. So in regards to the spirit, the fire element would correspond to the sense of sight, and it would also correspond to will. The air element would correspond to the sense of hearing, and it would also correspond to the intellect. The water element would correspond to the sense of feeling or perception in the exercises, and it would also correspond, well, I mean, it's feelings in both of them because they're basically feeling exercises, and water usually has to do with sensitivity and emotion in terms of the spirit. And then earth would correspond to consciousness. So I think it's important to know basically which ones you're strong in and which ones you're weak in. Actually, I'd say this is probably the most important part of the exercise, unless you just want to run through all of these over and over in a rote manner. I think as you're developing the soul mirror and getting to know how your different capacities, what's strong, what's weak, and how they correspond to the different kind of elements on the inside, I think that's really important. So, for example, here I would be strong in water and earth and weak in fire and air. So I'm weak in will and I'm weak in intellect. And, you could hear that and be like, well, you seem like a pretty smart guy. You don't seem weak in intellect. But I think intellect here, it's not necessarily how smart you are. It's, in a sense, how kind of balanced and organized your thinking is. So if you're like me and you can tend to be kind of scatterbrained or, ADD or things jumping off here and there, and, your inner dialogue can get a little strong sometimes. A lot of times I think that could correspond to the air element here, and in which case the hearing exercises and the concentration exercises would be good. I'm also weak in fire, which is will. And you might even want to think of will as some sort of strong sense of personal leverage inside, some strong sense of inner stability, a strong kind of self-sense within. And, I've often felt very weak in that, and that corresponds to sight. So for me, the concentration exercises I need to focus on the most are the ones that have to do with the visual exercises and the hearing exercises. For someone else, it could be different. Some people haven't really, maybe very strong-willed, maybe very organized cognitively, but emotionally and with feeling, they're a little weak. They don't have a huge sense of feeling. They may not relate as much to being an empath the way someone like me might. And then earth too. Earth, I'm I'm kind of strong in earth too, because earth can, kind of tend towards a melancholy demeanor. It can kind of tend towards taking on too much consciousness from different directions. And so that, if you have those indications, you might be strong in earth. But if you don't have those indications, you might need to do the earth exercises. And the earth exercises here are taste and smell. So that's just basically figuring out where your weaknesses are and where they aren't. So with the side exercises to strengthen the fire element and to strengthen the will, it is simply the visualization exercises, getting the different objects that Bardon talks about. And he mentioned some examples, but I think you could probably use whatever you're comfortable with. And you stare at an object, perhaps for 5 seconds, perhaps for 10 seconds, perhaps you need a 30-second to 2-minute look at the object to really study it and get it in your mind's eye, and then perhaps stare at a white wall and see if you can call that object to attention. And then practice with another object and another object and another object. And Bardon mentions, only do it for 10 minutes a day at first, maybe 30 minutes a day. I think that's good, because I think if you overkill it, you can just get a little scrambled. I think it's one of those things that's good to just do in small chunks of time and to keep coming back to. And it does seem, for me, having come from a kind of school of thought or meditative tradition where I was used to just kind of going into deep silence, this kind of focused visual concentration exercise is actually something very different. It's actually feels very, very mental. And hearing is the same thing. I think it's good to hear some certain sounds in real time, and then to see if you can kind of call those sounds up in your imagination. You might want to try a faucet. You might want to try a knocking. Bardon mentions the ticking of a clock. I don't really have an old-timey clock that ticks, but if you do, more power to you. That's probably a great one to use. Another one you could use is a bell. And you practice really kind of taking in these sounds with your ears, and then seeing if you can bring that sound inside into your internal world, into your imagination. And then with the feeling, with the water element, it's really a matter of feeling warm or cold, feeling heavy or light. I think those are the easiest ones. For me, being strong in water, I can start to feel real warm real quick, real cold real quick, real heavy real quick. Bardon even mentions hunger and thirst, and, I could get carried away trying to just feel myself into a state of hunger, and then pretty soon I'm not doing the exercises, I'm going to the kitchen. So that's actually one of the ways I can tell I'm really strong in water, and that's not necessarily something I'm going to work on because it gets so strong so quick. Whereas like the ones I'm weak on, like the visual and the fire exercise, I can practice that over and over and over again and still feel like I'm moving at a snail's pace. So that's one way to gauge too where you're weak and where you're strong, how quickly you can do it. And if you can just do it almost too quickly right off the bat, you're probably very strong in that area. And then if it takes a little more, then that's your weakness. But I have found if you focus on your weakness, it can really change my state of mind on a day-to-day basis if you just kind of tone up the weak area. And then the earth area, it's the tastes and the smells. You might want to practice smelling something and then, recalling that smell and bringing it up, tasting something and recalling that taste, bringing it up. That's another one I seem to be able to, do really quickly, whereas the hearing ones and the visual one is a little slow. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense to go through it. And I do find that the ones I'm weak on, it doesn't quite happen as quickly as he lays it out in the book either, still working on these, sure, go on in the steps, go on in the stages, but this is kind of a theme that kind of keeps coming up over and over and over again. And he mentions this throughout the spirit sections of the different chapters. So, I hope that helped. For me, it's been most beneficial practicing the visual and the hearing ones, and especially the hearing. I find that I have to spend a lot of time before actually trying to call and remember sounds, to just hear the sounds that are there first, to just basically get plugged in to the sense of hearing, whether it's just sitting outside, whether it's sitting in a room and listening to the silence of the fan, to just simply tune into the sense of hearing. And that's a powerful exercise that actually Eckhart Tolle mentions in The Power of Now as a way to just shut off the inner dialogue and to connect with the now. Just focus on listening to the silence. So, this Bardon exercise is doing the same thing. In a sense, it's really even honing it even that much more. But that's a powerful exercise in itself. And then with the sight too, I find that I basically have to really start looking at objects a good bit and studying them, and then trying to conjure them up. And that is actually the slowest moving of all of them. And one more thing, I do have a video on the importance of morning pages and journaling. Bardonites probably skipped over that video, but that's actually a great exercise to do before you start any of the initiation into Hermetics exercises. I mean, for me anyways, if I do 3 pages of writing out all my thoughts, that will clear my head, and it will kind of get things flowing in a way that going right into the exercise is a lot easier. So keep that in mind. You may want to watch that video too. And if you like this, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, everyone.